welcome back to YuriTales, where every story is original, every love is complicated, and nobody leaves without feeling something. I'm so glad you're here.
Now, get comfortable, because this one is gonna get you. Let's go.
The kingdom of Valdermoor was beautiful once. Golden fields stretched endlessly beneath a sky so blue it felt like hope itself lived there. Rivers shimmered like glass, reflecting a world untouched by fear. People laughed loudly, lived freely, and believed that whatever watched over them was kind. That was before the witch came. Now, the sky hangs between purple and gray, like a bruise that refuses to heal. The air feels heavier, like something unseen is always watching. Flowers bloom black at the edges of dying fields, and children learn fear long before they understand joy. People no longer speak loudly here. They whisper, they hurry, they avoid the dark, and most importantly, they never say her name unless they absolutely have to. Morrigan, the Witch of Valdermoor. They say she sits in a tower at the edge of everything, ancient, unmoving, untouched by time or consequence. They say she has no heart, that she cannot feel, that the last person who dared to look her in the eyes never came back. They say many things about her, terrible things, whispered things, safe things, because no one has ever asked the one question that matters. Why? No one, until me. My name is Seraphine, and I am about to make the worst decision of my life. It began with silence. Not the peaceful kind. Not the kind that settles over a kingdom at night. No, this silence felt wrong, like the world itself had paused. Like something had arrived, and everything else had decided, instinctively, to stop breathing. Then the bells rang. Loud, violent, desperate. The witch, close the gates, get inside. The streets erupted instantly. People running in every direction, mothers grabbing their children, merchants abandoning their goods, guards shouting orders they didn't believe would matter. Fear moved faster than sound, faster than thought, because this was not new fear. This was remembered fear, carved into the bones of Valdermoor. At the edge of the capital, the forest, trees bent away unnaturally, branches pulling back as if something approached that even nature refused to touch. Shadows stretched longer than they should, darker than they had any right to be, until they gathered, slowly, deliberately. And from them, she stepped out. Morrigan. She did not arrive with thunder. She did not need spectacle. Her presence alone was enough. Tall, still, wrapped in darkness that clung to her like it belonged there. Her long black hair moved softly, though the wind seemed careful not to touch her, and her eyes, faintly glowing, not wild, not chaotic, controlled, like destruction held patiently behind glass. The ground beneath her feet cracked quietly, dark veins spreading outward as if the land itself was decaying in her presence. She looked toward the kingdom, and for a moment she said nothing. Then softly, almost disappointed, still breathing, the palace gates slammed shut before she reached them, thick wood reinforced with iron. Guards forming a line that looked stronger from a distance than it felt up close. Their hands trembled around their weapons. Breaths uneven, eyes locked on the approaching figure that did not slow, did not hesitate, did not acknowledge fear, because fear meant nothing to her. "You are not welcome here," one guard shouted, his voice cracking under pressure. Morrigan tilted her head slightly, as if considering the statement. "Welcome," she repeated, almost amused. Then she lifted her hand. The air twisted. Torches died instantly, darkness swallowing the entrance hole, and when the light flickered back to life, half the guards had dropped to their knees, unable to stand. The rest stood frozen, not by magic, but by something far worse. Fear made real. "Open it," Morrigan said quietly. The gates obeyed. No one touched them. Inside the throne room waited, filled with nobles, advisors, soldiers, all gathered, all silent, all watching as the doors opened slowly, revealing the one thing none of them could stop. She walked forward, each step measured, controlled, echoing through the hall like a countdown no one could interrupt. Gold and marble surrounded her, symbols of power and pride, but in her presence it all felt small, fragile, temporary. Her gaze moved across the room, unimpressed. "Pathetic," she said. A man stepped forward, forced by duty more than courage, his voice loud but hollow. "You will not take this kingdom." Morrigan didn't even look at him. A small movement of her fingers, and he collapsed. Not dead, but broken, screaming as he hit the floor. Panic rippled through the room, until a voice cut through it. Enough, clear, steady, unafraid. Morrigan paused. Slowly, she turned, and there she was, standing near the throne, golden hair catching the dim light like something that refused to fade. Posture straight, expression calm, eyes sharp, focused, and most importantly, not. The entire room shifted around her, subtly, but undeniably, as if something invisible had just changed. You didn't kneel, Morrigan said. The woman held her gaze. Neither did you. A ripple of shock passed through the hall. No one spoke to the witch like that. No one. And you are? Morrigan asked, her voice quieter now, more focused. Seraphine, the name settled between them. Soft, but unbreakable. You understand what stands before you, Morrigan said. Yes, and yet, you remain standing. Seraphine stepped forward. Just once. I don't bow to threats. Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. Everything bows, Morrigan said softly. Seraphine's chin lifted slightly. Then make me. That was it. The moment everything changed. The air snapped violently as Morrigan's magic surged, shadows exploding outward like living things, rushing towards Seraphine with enough force to crush, to silence, to end. And then, light, blinding, violent in its... It burst from Seraphine, without warning, golden energy, colliding with the darkness midair, the impact shaking the entire hall, a shockwave ripping outward, cracking marble, sending nobles stumbling back, the air itself trembling under the force. Then, stillness. Complete, impossible stillness. The magic vanished, as if it had never existed. Morrigan stood frozen, not from fear, but from something far more unfamiliar, shock. Her attack had been stopped. Seraphine stood across from her, breathing slightly heavier now, her hand still faintly glowing, her expression no longer calm, but not afraid either. Confused. What? She whispered. Morrigan stared at her, really stared this time, not as prey, not as an obstacle, but as something that should not exist. You, Morrigan said slowly, her voice lower now, sharper, should not exist. The room held its breath. Seraphine swallowed, just slightly, her composure cracking for the first time. But she didn't... Looks like we both have a problem, she said quietly. A long pause. Then Morrigan smiled. Not kindly, not softly, dangerously. Interesting. And for the first time, the Witch of Valdermoor was not entirely in control. She stepped back, only once, but everyone felt it. Then the shadows rose again, swallowing her whole, pulling her into darkness until she was gone. Just like that. Silence filled the throne room, heavy and suffocating, because one truth now echoed louder than any scream. The witch had been challenged, and she had not won. Seraphine stood alone in the center of the hall, her heart racing now, her hand trembling slightly as the last traces of light flickered and faded. What did I just do? She whispered. Far beyond the kingdom walls, deep within the forest that refused to live, Morrigan stood still, her magic restless, unstable, reacting in a way it never had before. Her gaze turned slowly toward the distant palace. I will break her, she said quietly. A pause. Then, softer, or I will understand her, and that was far more dangerous, because the next time they met, it would not be a warning. It would be war. So why did neither of them look away first? The kingdom did not celebrate. It watched, carefully, quietly, like something fragile had shifted, and no one was sure whether to hope or to run. By morning, the story had already spread beyond the palace walls, slipping through the streets, carried in whispers that grew louder with every retelling. Some said the witch had been challenged. Others said she had been stopped. But the version that lingered, the one people repeated in hushed voices when they thought no one was listening, was far simpler and far more dangerous. She survived. Not escaped. Not spared. Survived. And in a kingdom that had learned to measure life in moments borrowed from fear, that alone was enough to change everything. Stood in the council chamber, the weight of those whispers pressing invisibly against her. The room was filled with men who had once spoken to her with certainty, with structure, with the confidence of people who believed they understood the world they lived in. Now, their voices overlapped, sharp and uneven, threaded with something they could not quite hide. Fear. She will return, one of them said, pacing. You've given her reason. I didn't give her anything, Seraphine replied calmly, though her voice carried a quiet edge. She came here, and you challenged her, another snapped. In front of the entire court, Seraphine's gaze lifted slightly, steady, unwavering. Would you have preferred I knelt? Silence fell, heavy and immediate, because no one in that room had an answer they were willing to say out loud. One of the older council members leaned forward slowly, his hands clasped together, his expression tight with concern. You don't understand what you've become. That made her pause. What I've become? You are no longer just the king's daughter, he said quietly. You are the one she noticed. The words settled deeper than anything else had. Not the threat, not the argument. That. Seraphine exhaled slowly, turning away from the table, her thoughts already moving ahead of them. Then we prepare, she said. For what? Someone demanded. She stopped at the tall window overlooking the city, her reflection faint against the bruised sky beyond. For her to come back, she answered. Far beyond the kingdom walls, where the land had long since given up trying to live, Morrigan stood motionless beneath a sky that never quite changed. The forest around her shifted uneasily, shadows stretching and recoiling as if even they struggled to remain steady in her presence. Something was wrong, not with the world, with her. Lifted slowly, dark magic gathering at her fingertips, familiar, controlled, until the energy flickered, stuttering briefly before stabilizing. And for the first time in longer than she cared to remember, Morrigan frowned. That had never happened before. Light, she murmured, the word tasting unfamiliar, unwanted. Her gaze sharpened, turning toward the distant silhouette of Valdermoor, visible even from here like a scar against the horizon. You interfered, she said softly. The memory replayed without her permission, golden light colliding with her magic, not breaking, not bending, stopping it. Impossible. And yet, her fingers curled slowly, the shadows around her responding instantly this time, coiling with renewed intensity as her control reasserted itself. If you exist, Morrigan continued quietly, her voice lowering, tightening, then you can be broken. The forest fell still. Then, without another word, she raised her hand. Umbra, Sequer. The shadows responded immediately, pulling together, condensing into something sharper, thinner, more precise than before. Not a wave, not an attack. It pulsed once, faintly, before vanishing into nothing. Or rather, not nothing. Directed. Seraphine felt it before anyone else did. A sudden sharp shift in the air, like the world had tilted slightly off balance. Her breath caught, just for a moment, her body reacting before her mind could follow. Your Highness, one of the guards started, noticing the change in her posture. Move, she said. There was no hesitation in her voice this time. Move, she repeated, sharper. The courtyard had barely begun to react when the ground beneath her feet darkened. Then it moved. Shadows rose violently from the stone, twisting upward in unnatural shapes, wrapping around her ankle first, then her wrist, tightening instantly, cold and unyielding. The sword slipped from her hand, clattering uselessly against the ground. Protect her! Someone shouted. Guards surged forward, weapons drawn, but the shadows ignored them completely, slipping past steel and strength like they weren't even there. They weren't attacking, they were hunting. Her. Seraphine struggled against the hold, her breath catching as the shadows tightened further, pulling her balance off-center. The cold seeped into her skin, sharp and invasive, like it was trying to reach deeper than flesh. She found a way, she whispered. The shadows surged upward, faster now, coiling toward her throat, and for the first time since the throne room, fear flickered. Then light exploded from her, brighter than before. Wilder, uncontrolled, golden energy tore through the shadows, burning them away in an instant, forcing them back violently. But it didn't stop there. It surged outward, expanding too quickly, too powerfully, cracking the stone beneath her feet, sending nearby guards stumbling back as the force pushed against everything around her. Seraphine gasped, dropping to one knee as the light continued to pulse erratically, flickering like it had a will of... I can't, she breathed, her hands trembling as she tried to steady it. The power didn't listen. It lashed outward again, uncontrolled, dangerous, not just defending, protecting, overreacting. Stay back, one of the guards shouted, pulling others away as the light flared again. Seraphine squeezed her eyes shut, forcing herself to focus, to breathe, to control something that clearly did not want to be controlled. Then, darkness cut through it. Clean, precise, final. The golden light vanished instantly, like it had been smothered, leaving behind a sudden heavy silence that felt louder than the chaos before it. Seraphine froze. She didn't need to look to know. You're getting worse, Morrigan said. The voice was calm, too calm. Seraphine opened her eyes slowly, and there she was, standing just a few steps away, untouched by the destruction, shadows coiling gently at her feet, controlled, obedient. Everything Seraphine's power was not. You did that, Seraphine said, pushing herself up slightly, her voice unsteady. Morrigan tilted her head, studying her like something newly discovered. I marked you, she replied. The words settled, heavier than expected. What does that mean? Seraphine asked. Morrigan stepped closer. Slowly, deliberately. It means, she said quietly, I don't have to look for you anymore. The guards moved again, circling, trying to close in, but they hesitated, every instinct warning them they were stepping into something far beyond their control. Morrigan didn't even glance at them. Her focus never left Seraphine. You forced my magic to react, she continued. So now I'll force yours. Seraphine straightened, ignoring the lingering tremor in her hands, meeting her gaze head-on. You don't control me? Morrigan's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. I don't need to. A subtle movement of her fingers, and the shadows surged again, wrapping around Seraphine's wrists, holding her in place. Not to kill, to test, to push, break it. Seraphine's eyes narrowed slightly. Or what? Morrigan stepped closer again, close enough now that the space between them felt charged, unstable, like something unseen was pressing in. Or I keep going, she said softly, until something inside you does. Silence stretched between them, heavy, unforgiving. Seraphine's breathing slowed, steadied, her gaze unwavering despite the restraint. You're afraid, she said. The shadows tightened instantly. Not enough to injure, enough to warn. Morrigan's eyes darkened. Of what? Seraphine leaned forward just slightly, the movement small but deliberate. Of not understanding me. The air shifted. Something in Morrigan's expression flickered, subtle but real. Careful, she murmured. Why? Seraphine asked quietly. Morrigan leaned in just enough to close the distance further, her voice dropping, lower, sharper. Because next time, she said, I won't test you. A pause. Then softer. Released her instantly. Seraphine staggered back half a step, catching herself, still standing, still facing her. Morrigan turned. The shadows rose again, folding around her, pulling her back into darkness. Gone? Just like before? The courtyard remained silent, long after she disappeared. Because this time, it was different. This wasn't an attack on the kingdom. It was personal. Seraphine looked down slowly, her breath catching as her gaze settled on her wrist. There, just beneath the skin, a mark, dark, moving, alive. What did you do to me? She whispered. Far away, Morrigan stood once more beneath the unmoving sky. Her expression unreadable, her magic steady again, controlled again, but something beneath it had shifted. She could feel it, the connection, faint, but undeniable. Her fingers curled slowly. Run, she murmured. A pause. Then, it won't matter, because now, no matter where Seraphine went, she would always find. And next time, it wouldn't be a warning. So why did she already know she wouldn't kill her? By nightfall, Valdermoor no longer felt like the same kingdom. Nothing had been destroyed. No walls had fallen. No bodies lined the streets. And somehow, that made it worse. Because destruction could be rebuilt, but uncertainty, that lingered, that spread, that settled into people's bones and refused to leave. And now, it wasn't just the witch they feared. It was her. Seraphine felt it the moment she stepped into the corridor. The way conversation stopped too quickly. The way eyes followed her just a little longer than before. The way even the guards, trained to stand firm in the face of fear, shifted slightly when she passed. Not disrespect, not disobedience. Something else. Hesitation. Say it, she said suddenly, stopping mid-step. The maid behind her froze. Your Highness? Seraphine turned slowly, her expression calm but direct. You're afraid of me. The girl swallowed, her fingers tightening around the cloth in her hands. Yes. No denial, no lie. Just truth. Seraphine held her gaze for a moment, then nodded once. That makes two of us. She turned and continued walking, because that was the part no one else understood. They were afraid of what she had done. She was afraid of what she might do next. Sleep didn't come easily. It lingered just out of reach, like everything else in her life now, slipping further away the moment she tried to grasp it. Quiet! The kind of quiet that should have been comforting, but wasn't, because she could feel it. Not the mark, not exactly. Something deeper, like a thread, thin, invisible, pulling, watching, waiting. Seraphine lay still, staring up at the ceiling, her fingers brushing lightly against her wrist where the dark mark rested beneath her skin. It had not faded, had not dulled. If anything, it felt more present now, more aware. This is not normal, she murmured under her breath. A pause. Then, nothing about you is... The voice came from the darkness. Calm, familiar, too close. Seraphine didn't sit up immediately, didn't react the way most would. Instead, she exhaled slowly. "You really need to work on your entrances," she said. Silence. "Then, I don't need to impress you." Seraphine pushed herself up slowly, her gaze shifting toward the corner of the room where the shadow seemed slightly deeper, slightly wrong. "Then, why do you keep showing up in my room?" Morrigan stepped forward, not emerging, revealing, like she had always been there, simply choosing to be seen now. Same stillness, same control. But tonight, something was different. Subtle, sharp. Her gaze lingered longer. Her presence felt closer. "You are marked," Morrigan said. "That gives me access." Seraphine tilted her head slightly. "Access to what?" Morrigan didn't answer immediately. Her eyes flickered briefly to Seraphine's wrist, then back to her face. The words landed heavier than expected. Seraphine's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted slightly, just enough to notice. "That sounds like a threat," she said. "It is." A pause. Then Seraphine smiled faintly. "You're not very creative." Morrigan's eyes narrowed. "And you are becoming very comfortable." Seraphine stood now, slowly closing the distance between them, her steps measured, deliberate, controlled. "And you're still not killing me," she replied. That again. That question again. But this time, it didn't feel like curiosity. It felt like pressure. Morrigan's gaze sharpened. "Don't mistake hesitation for mercy." "Then what is it?" Seraphine asked quietly. Silence. The air between them tightened, invisible tension pulling at something neither of them fully understood yet. Morrigan stepped closer. Close enough now that the difference between them was no longer distance. "You are interfering with something you don't understand," Morrigan said. Seraphine didn't move. "Then explain it." Morrigan's jaw tightened slightly. "I don't explain myself." Seraphine let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh. "Right, you just threaten, attack, and disappear dramatically." That was new. A flicker of something crossed Morrigan's expression. Brief, sharp, annoyance. "You are testing your limits," Morrigan said. Seraphine's eyes held hers. "Maybe I'm testing yours." The room shifted. Not physically. Something deeper. Something unstable. The mark on Seraphine's wrist pulsed suddenly. Dark. Alive. Morrigan's gaze snapped to it instantly. "Interesting," she murmured. Seraphine frowned slightly, glancing down as a faint ache spread through her arm. What is that supposed to? Pain cut her off. Sharp. Sudden. It tore through her wrist, up her arm, forcing her breath to hitch as she staggered slightly. Morrigan moved instantly. Too fast. Her hand closed around Seraphine's wrist before she could pull away. And the moment their skin touched, everything stopped. The pain, the air, the world. For a single suspended second, there was nothing. Then it hit. Not magic. Not exactly. Something deeper. A surge of light and shadow colliding not outward, but inward. Pulling, clashing, reacting violently between them. The room dimmed and brightened at the same time. Shadows flickering. Golden light sparking unpredictably. And neither of them let go. Seraphine's breath caught, her free hand instinctively gripping Morrigan's arm, steadying herself as the energy surged between them. Morrigan didn't move. Didn't pull away. Didn't break the contact. Her eyes locked onto Seraphine's. Not cold this time. Not distant. Focused. Searching. "What are you—" Seraphine started, her voice unsteady. "Quiet," Morrigan said sharply, but her voice wasn't calm for the first time. It wasn't The energy spiked again. Stronger this time, forcing both of them closer. The space between them collapsing entirely as the connection tightened, unstable, unpredictable. Then it stopped. Abruptly. Violently. Morrigan released her, stepping back immediately. Too quickly, as if the contact had burned. Seraphine staggered slightly, catching herself, her heart racing now for a completely different reason. "What was that?" she whispered. Morrigan didn't answer. She was staring at her, really staring, like she was seeing something she hadn't seen before, or something she had been trying not to. "That shouldn't happen," Morrigan said finally. Seraphine let out a breath, still trying to steady herself. "You keep saying that like it means something." "It means," Morrigan said, her voice lower now, tighter, "you are not supposed to exist." A pause. Then Seraphine met her gaze again. "Then maybe the problem isn't me?" Morrigan's eyes darkened. "Careful. Or what?" Seraphine pressed. Silence. Long. And then Morrigan turned. Just like that. Shadows rising, pulling her back, swallowing her presence as quickly as it had appeared. Gone. But this time, it didn't feel like an exit. It felt like a decision. Seraphine stood there, unmoving, her pulse still racing, her wrist still tingling where Morrigan had touched her. Slowly, she lifted her hand. The mark was still there, darker now, more defined, more alive. "What did you do?" she whispered. But the question no longer felt like it had one answer. Far beyond the palace walls, deep within the cursed forest, Morrigan stood still, her breathing uneven in a way that should not have been possible. Her hand lifted slowly, the same hand that had touched her. For a moment, it trembled. She clenched it tightly, forcing the movement to stop, her expression hardening instantly. "No," she said under her breath, but the word lacked conviction. Her magic stirred around her, restless again, reacting, shifting, not in response to the world, but to her, to what had just happened, to her. Morrigan's gaze turned sharply toward the distant kingdom, toward the palace, toward her. "This ends now," she said. A pause. Then quieter, before it becomes something else. But even as she said it, something deep beneath the anger, beneath the control, beneath everything she had built to keep herself untouched, had already begun to change. And that was the real danger. Because the next time they met, it wouldn't just be power that collided. It would be something far more unpredictable, something neither of them could control.
And that is where we leave you tonight. I know. We will be back very soon with the next episode, I promise you. It only gets deeper from here.
If you felt something, drop your favorite moment in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you are watching this for the first time, welcome to the kingdom. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what happens next. Because in Crowns and Curses, nothing is ever what it seems. And nobody falls the way these two will fall. Until next time, stay brave and remember, the most powerful magic in any world is the kind that chooses you back. See you in episode 2.